Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Craft of the Draft podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Nathan Seppi, again joined by Jonty Ralph Smith. How are you, Jonty?
Yeah, really good. It was a great weekend of footy. Good to have boys footy back and girls footy continuing. Some teams kicking off their girls campaign as well. But getting into the real thick of it in the Talent League season. So yeah, looking forward to looking at who played well.
Yeah, well, it was an interesting first round for the boys and the girls. We've seen a couple of teams play now twice, but we still haven't seen the Metro teams. So look, we'll give a bit of a preview at the end when we do our tips, which we know, word has it, they're quite popular, these tips. So we'll continue to give our expert tipping analysis on who we think is going to win each week. But now let's crack into the week that's just been. And we had 4 girls' games. So we're going to start with the girls' games. And the first one was out in Ballarat, doubleheader with the boys. So the girls played first, and the Rebels won that game at 7-8-50, and they beat the Pioneers 3-3-21. So the Rebels bounced back against the Falcons. They lost to the week before, and the Pioneers had their first loss, and they beat Murray in the first round. So both teams sit at 1-1. But I'll start with GWV, Isabella Davies. We spoke about her preseason with her testing. That was phenomenal. And Sal Riley really backed in her preseason form as well to continue into rounds 1 and 2. And that certainly has been the case. She had 27 touches, 19 kicks. She's playing on the wing a lot. And I think that position just suits her so well with her running capacity and her endurance. And she's benefiting off the vision she's seen at training. And that's definitely impacting her game a lot. And her kick-ins improved as well, which was visible on the weekend. So a really good game for her.
That's really good. And I know Molly Walton's watching GWV last week. Molly Walton's work rate was one thing that stood out, and Millie Lane was another one. Do you want to give an insight perhaps into one of those players?
Millie Lane was fantastic. She was reading the ball really well as a backliner. 21 touches, 5 marks, 4 tackles, and I think a common trend we're seeing with the girls is just the tackling pressure is much higher now. And a lot of girls are getting average, I'd say 5, 6, 7 tackles a game. And I think there was one team across the weekend that I reckon the top 5, 6 girls had around 11 tackles, 10 tackles each. So it's definitely increasing.
Yeah, no, very good. And I suppose from a Bendigo perspective, Lucia Painter's going to be all the talk all season, but she's put forward a really strong performance again to start the season. So she started with a bang.
Yeah, no, started really well. A player that really enjoys the contest, but her work rate is really high, and it's just something that she prides herself on. And it's been shown in the games that she's got the ability to really press every contest, make an impact, and she definitely showed that on Saturday. 8 tackles, 28 touches. So she was the leading disposal getter for Bendigo.
And I suppose to touch on some other sort of leading statistic getters from a Bendigo perspective, Lila Keck, who we've spoken about previously on the podcast, 15 disposals and 11 tackles. So again, that probably speaks to her work rate and her the stuff she does without the ball. Jamaica Douglas, we've given a shout out. I know you've spoken to her, Nathan, and Gemma Roberts, 10 disposals and 9 tackles as well. Jamaica with 18 touches and a goal. But what about Stephanie Demio? She's one who people within Bendigo are really liking how she's going, and probably one we haven't touched on yet.
Yeah, Steph Demio, she's part of the leadership group for the Pioneers. So a very, very good leader, and one that a lot of the girls look up to. Just her ability to use the ball is exceptional, and to read the play and position it and put herself in good positions is something that Whitney Kennedy, coach, the Bendigo coach, really loves about her. So she's one that keep an eye on. She's performing really well and really consistently. So some good starts for the Bendigo players. And yeah, but let's move on straight away to the second game. Wasn't as good a result for Murray as they would have hoped for. They got beaten by the Swans 128 to 11-77. And look, if the Swans were in this league, they'd be a tough team to beat. So I think a lot of talent league clubs at the moment are looking at the Swans and probably a bit thankful that they're exiting in a couple of weeks. But not as good a day for Murray. And look, a couple names I'll sort of talk about, but there wasn't as much to talk about with Murray, obviously, with not as good a day. Chloe McElhaney has been definitely the standout for Coach Emma Mackey. 17 disposals, 8 rebound 50s, but just a really solid backliner that knows how to read the play well and just provide Murray with those opportunities to transition forward. really fast burst pace out of defensive 50. So she was one that stood out. But some other names on the day that played well, Alice had 20 performed well on the day, and still to keep your eye out, but not a good day for Murray in the end. So they moved to 0-2, but there's been some promise. Look, it's a good thing about a season now is that this don't lose out the last couple of years. But we'll go to probably the closest game of the round, which was Geelong and Dandenong. Jonty, you know a lot about this one. Dandenong got up by 10 points in the end, so they do bounce back after that round one loss to the Swans. But we'll touch on Geelong first. Tell me a bit about Sarah Howley's game. How did she perform? What was the standout for her for Geelong?
Yeah, well, she's one who backed up a really strong round one performance and did it all again in round two. So for her, it's just for the upcoming weeks, because she's shown what she's able to do already with, I think, probably about 60 disposals across the first two rounds, averaging 30 disposals. And we know girls footy only play 20 minutes flat. So to be able to do that, her ability to sort of get out of contest and get into space is what's really impressed. So she's been the really good midfielder from a Geelong perspective. But I think from that game, the really impressive thing was the high standard of footy, and something that a lot of people who watched the game really touched on, how far female footy has sort of come, and that game was probably really indicative of it. A couple of the stronger teams in the competition, and Dandenong certainly did bounce back from a poorer round one showing. But before we get to them, I suppose the others to touch on from a Geelong perspective would be Mika Morrissey, who's sort of rebound from the back half, really impressed, and Chloe Adams. I mean, we talk about Sarah Howley with her ability in performing both round one and round two, but Chloe Adams was another one who was able to do that. The skipper of the side, she stood up last week in a really hot and tough day, and she did it again. It was a real skipper's performance, and she has traits and a lot of upside as a sort of modern female midfielder.
And we'll touch on Dandenong. There was a bit of news out of one of Dandenong's star players, Meg Robertson. Can you tell me about her game, but what the extra news is with her?
Yeah, so Meg got a concussion late in the game, so it was a pretty scary incident, and play was stopped for several minutes, and she ended up spending some time at the Geelong hospital. But with the concussion, I suppose the first thing would be just how well it was sort of handled, and speaking to sort of people around the club. And she wasn't the only one that got a concussion on the weekend. There were a couple in the talent league, but it's good to hear how seriously those sort of injuries are being taken. But it is an unfortunate way for her day to end. She will now miss the next couple of weeks, just with the fixturing of Dandenong playing 2 games in the next 12 days, or 12 days from Sunday when they played. But it was really as good a midfielder game from a girl as you'll see, like really clean, and she really showed off all her traits. She's been all the talk in pre-season, so really looking forward to seeing if she can back it up when she does get back on the park. But yeah, I suppose also from a Dandenong perspective, Sophie Butterworth kicking the 4 goals out of her team's 8 is really impressive. She has worked really hard in pre-season. She's a natural talent, and now she's marrying that up with work rate and getting her rewards. And Brooke Smith, one who we haven't talked about, she was also really polished in the forward half and set up Sophie all day. She's been a sort of rebounding half back throughout her career, but she's been recast as a forward and has taken to that role really well. This was her first game this season on the weekend, having played 3 games in each of 2021 and 2022, and she did well. So looking forward to seeing if she can back it up next week as an overager.
So both those teams moved to 1-1 now, which is obviously a trend now. A lot of teams are 1-1. Now we move to the last game of round 2, which was sort of similar to Murray's experience with Gippsland, and GWS Academy came and they did beat Gippsland quite convincingly 0-2 to GWS 6-11-47. Jonty, obviously, the scoreline suggests it probably wasn't a great day, but there were a lot of positives with the names that played well. So tell me a bit about Gippsland's main stars on the day and why they performed so well in not as good a day for the team.
Yeah, I suppose the first thing to mention is it's credit to Nathan Boyd and the coaching staff that are able to marshal their troops and put forward a performance where their best quarter was probably their fourth quarter, would have been easy to fall over given how difficult a day it was with the start that their opposition got away to, which got to a point where it was clear that they weren't going to win the game. But yeah, I suppose if you look at performers who went well, Ash Centra is the key one that stands out. She played across all four lines, defence, midfield and forward, started in the forward line, was injected into the midfield a little bit later and spent some time in the ruck even and did really well wherever she was playing. So she's one to keep an eye on because we know how talented she is and she's shown that she's ready. Still some things to work on, but certainly there were positive signs for a round one performance where her team was beaten. Amber Shute did some things, and then you look at someone like a Sienna Lane in defence. She had to repel quite a lot and did that quite well. So they were probably the three names that I'd mention. Tyler Byrne, maybe the other one from a Gippsland perspective that caught my eye, and Alicia Molesworth, who's Box Hill VFLW listed. But they'll be better for the experience. So looking forward to seeing them bounce back, because from what I saw, their ability to fight out, I've got no doubt they will put forward better performances this season.
Actually first and second, but we're not going to obviously count them as part of that ladder. We've got GWV. It's actually 5 of the 7 Talent League teams are on 4 points, and Murray and Gippsland still to win a game, but very close. It's only percentage that separates the teams. So GWV and Tassie sit up the top and Dandenong third. A very close season, but let's actually move now to our round 3 tips for the girls for round 3, and we're starting off with Bendigo and GWS. Based off what we've seen, both are probably going to be a very competitive game. GWS know how to win, Bendigo know how to win, but I'm going to give the home ground advantage and back Bendigo.
And I'll say the GWS Academy, their fundamentals are really good and Julie did on the weekend, so I'll back them to back it up.
And then our second game, Geelong and Oakley. A very big game. This is the first time we're seeing some Metro teams now, so it's actually very hard to predict because we don't know if these teams are going to come out and dominate or, have a bit of rust, because these country teams do have a bit of an advantage at the moment playing some early games. So I'm going to back Geelong based off the fact they have had 2 games now to settle into it.
And I'll go Geelong as well. Yeah, Geelong by 3 goals.
Murray and Northern is the third game at Wangaratta. Again, it's hard to back the Metro team when they haven't had as much full game experience. There's been practice matches, but they haven't had the real experience yet. So I think Murray as well, after a pretty disappointing performance, will look to bounce back and they'll win this one.
And I'll say Northern by 5 goals. They've had some really strong practice matches, and I've seen enough signs that I'm happy to back them.
Tassie and Western in Tasmania is the 4th game of the round. Tassie looked very strong in their first game, and Jodie Clifford backs them to make finals. That was her pre-season statement, and I think they won't. I don't think they'll lose.
I'll go Tassie. Yeah, Tassie by a couple of goals, I think, as well.
And then we move to it actually is the first game of the round now, but on the original fixture, Calder and Sandy is the 5th game of the round. A very big Metro game. All Metro games are pretty big when they play each other. Both teams look pretty good from pre-season form. I'm going to back Calder on this one. I think the plethora of Strathmore girls will just create a very good team environment. So I think Calder will get up.
I think Calder by a couple of goals in this one. Yep.
And then on the Sunday, we have a double header at Kilsyth. We have Easton and Dandenong. We were at the practice match for that not too long ago. So it's a very recent matchup, but I'm going to back Easton again. They beat Dandenong with Dandenong's relatively full-strength team in the practice match. So I'm backing Easton.
Flip of the coin, I think this one will be a bit tighter. It's a true season game, but it is Easton's first game. But I did tip them as my premiership favourites. So, yeah, I think they've got a lot of top-end talent. I'd go Easton.
And then the last game of the round, Gippsland and GWV, I'm going to back GWV. They're just in such hot form at the moment. And with the likes of Jess Wrench, Isabella Davies just running right at the moment, it's hard to see the Rebels losing this one.
Yeah, and they fought it out really well in round 1, GWV. in a tough result or a tough day for footy. So yeah, I'll go GWV by 5 goals.
So that's our girls' review of the episode done. So we're now moving to the boys' side of what happened in round one, and a lot of eyes are on the boys in round one, as you can imagine, because we only have about 4 weeks to see the full teams, really, and then we move to about 2-3 months of ins and outs, and it's a different team each week, which is, it's usual, but it's a good thing because we'll get to see a lot of different talent, after that period. But for the first 4 weeks, we're seeing what every team has to offer. So we'll start with Northern and GWS. A very scrappy game from what we've heard. Northern certainly didn't put the scoreboard impact they probably wish they would have had, 5-19-49 to GWS 6-6-42. So I think the scoreline probably doesn't indicate Northern's dominance at time. But Jonty spoke to Coach Anthony Rocker about Northern's performance. Tell me who he thought impressed and played well on the day. How'd Charlie Nash, Jack Chubb, these players go on the day?
Yeah, I suppose the first thing to bring up is, probably Northern's pressure was really good from what you sort of see and hear around the place. And like you say, the scoreboard ascendancy, they didn't get that, Northern, but they were clearly the better team, and the ball was in their forward line for much of the day. So it was a really strong performance from them. You asked about Charlie Nash. He kicked the match winner in the fourth quarter, having missed a few earlier opportunities, and Jack Chubb is the one who hit him up, and he was really good as a high forward. I've seen him in practice matches, and he's really impressed me just with his clean hands. He's a 19-year-old, so he's come back and had an impact straight away, which is really good for him. One of their better performers on the day. And probably, if you were going to mention another player, it would be Zach Johnson, whose drive from the midfield was really impressive in that game. Rowan McKenzie in the midfield, another one who more so in the second half was probably one whose pressure personified what Northern brought as a whole team. So he was really good. And then you also had Christian Ferronato, who laid a lot of tackles, and Christian Mardini in the back half played a key role as well, as did Lucas McInerney as a 17-year-old. So they'd be the main names out of that game. But yeah, winning by 7 points probably felt more like an 8 or 9 goal victory to watch if you were watching that one.
And one name I want to mention that was actually playing for GWS, and we don't usually focus on any of the academy teams, but in this case is a bit of an interesting one with Harvey Thomas. Can you tell me a bit more about him, Jonty? He's looking at making a move to one of the Metro clubs in the coming future. So tell me a bit more about Harvey Thomas.
Yeah, so he'll link up with Oakley after round 4, but yeah, started the season with GWS, and round 1 he's played with aplomb. I mean, to go out there, he got 30 touches and 17 tackles, and those sort of numbers in any game, but particularly in a boys' game, are unheard of. You say that girls' tackles numbers, you said earlier, can sometimes be quite high, but to be that high for a boys' game, you don't often see that. So his work rate both ways was really impressive from a GWS perspective. And I know watching him in the practice match that Oakley played last week against Sandringham, he was one of Oakley's more impressive players. So he'll come back in, probably play in their forward line, you'd think. They're going with a pretty young midfield, and hopefully slots in as well at Oakley and can carry over this strong form from GWS's academy.
So a lot to look forward to there with Harvey Thomas. And now we move to the second game of the round, which was the big Metro clash of the round, which was Sandringham and Eastern at RSEA. Jonty, you were at that one. I got to catch glimpses. There were about 4 games going on at that time with the boys and the girls. So it was a bit of a full-on period. So you saw most of it. I saw half of it. Tell me about that game in general, what you saw, who stood out from everyone, because I think there were a lot of things to unpack with that game. And it was a good game of footy in general, and it went down to the last quarter, back and forth. But tell me from your perspective, seeing it live, who stood out?
Yeah, it was. It was a good game of footy, and I think I've probably, whether I've said it on the podcast or I've certainly said it to people, those 2 teams are probably going to be the 2 teams that have the most players drafted this season. And that's probably why it was such a high standard. I mean, when you got down to the last quarter, the skill level did probably drop off, and it did have that typical round 1 feel. There were a lot of players cramping and that sort of thing. But yeah, no, it was good to see a lot of top end talent really perform. Like from a Sandringham perspective, you had Will Brown, who got quite a lot of the footy. I think he finished with 24 touches as a big bodied midfielder and took to that role and took to the captaincy really well. Archie Roberts did a couple of things, probably a little bit quieter, 18 touches, and Levi Ashcroft did really well in the midfield and then went forward and kicked a really classy goal, a right foot banana. But I suppose to look at names beyond the obvious who performed, Harvey Johnston continues to put himself on the map, 19 touches, two goals. We talk about his composure and execution and vision, his ability in traffic every week. But one other from a Sandringham perspective, then I'll speak about Eastern, probably Miles Enders up forward. It was really impressive to see him in the first half when Eastern probably had a bit more of the ascendancy in the first half before Sandy did come back into it. He was one who gave them a lot of zest and a lot of scoring potency. He finished with 2 goals, 3, and probably only touched it 10 to 12 times, but it did feel like any time the ball went into his area, he was going to impact, and that was particularly pertinent in the first half.
And then for Eastern, Cooper Trembath, Josh Tovey in defence. Tell me a bit more why they were so prominent in that backline and made an impact.
I think the whole backline in general from an Eastern perspective was quite tall. Andy were probably bombing it in a little bit in the first half, and that allowed the intercepting of Eastern to really come to the fore, and Cooper Trembath was probably one in particular who led that, and he played really well at Hillsville in a practice match last week against Western as well, so he's one to keep your eye on. I think he finished with a team high 9 marks, so yeah, he was really good, as was, like you say, Josh Tovey down there, captain in defence. He was one of the best players according to the coaches. And then if you look in their midfield, you had Josh Smiley and Cody Anderson, a couple of bottom majors, big-bodied sort of players who were really good. And then up forward, Riley Weatherall playing on who did he play on? Lockie Voss. He got a bit of a run on in the third quarter and kicked 3 consecutive goals, which really pulled Eastern back into it. And Mason Sazzoni from Sandringham got the job on Nick Watson, who he's always going to have moments up forward, Nick Watson, and he did that as you expected on Saturday.
Let's move on now to the third game of the round. We had Western Jets and the Sydney Swans Academy. It was very competitive for about 3 quarters, Jonty, and then the Swans just turned it up in the fourth quarter and rolled over the Jets in the end, getting up by 27 points. So the Academies have got off to a good start. You know, you don't expect that very often, but and the boys as well, they've got off to a good start. But we were always going to expect Logan Morris to be the prominent figure on the day. But apart from Logan Morris, can you tell me a bit more about Luca Grego, Daniel Snell? Why did these players stand up as well for the Jets?
Yeah, I suppose Logan Morris, to start on him, 4 goals, took his opportunity up forward. And in the third quarter, when Western had the breeze, Sydney finished with the breeze, Western had the breeze in the fourth quarter. He was one who really wrenched the momentum and gave Western a little bit of a scoreboard ascendancy. So he was really good, as you would expect. He's got good hands above his head as well. But Luca Grego in the midfield, really good to see him perform well and back up probably what I saw at Hillsville last week. He played a really good game. His 2-way running all day was what stood out. I know that obviously when you are getting beaten in the last quarter and they might have gone into their shells a little bit, being the scoreline, being conservative, that's what people who watched the game sort of said it looked like, but he was one whose effort never really faltered. So that was really good. And when he had the ball, he did reasonable things with it as well. So he did well. And Daniel Snell, another bottom major who tested really well and didn't get as much of the footy, but still really impressed with winning a lot of outnumbers. He had a few sort of 1-on-3s, 1-on-4s, and he was able to either halve or win those, which really caught the eye, even though he did only have the 8 touches. And then Lucas Impey in the ruck was the other one. He was probably the only player in the 22 that didn't play in the firsts in Western's pracky match against Eastern, but he came in and competed really well, did some things around the ground, and probably won the ruck battle throughout the day. He's got a basketball background, so he's one to keep an eye on. Clearly a similar background to Rook Barry, who's also tall and got that basketball background for the Jets. So keep an eye on him throughout the season, see if he can back it up.
And then our fourth game of the round, GWV defeated the Pioneers 11-9, 75-9-6. 60, George Stevens, just a bit of an update on him. He returned well, but still getting back to good form. Another player I thought stood out. This was a game I watched for quite a bit on Saturday.
Yeah.
Luman Lual just played fantastically, and such a great defender that really picks up on those second efforts quite a lot, and just really good composure around any contested play. And I thought that just stood out. But among everything else, whenever there was pressure from the Bendigo forwards, he just stood up, put his front foot forward, and took the game on himself. And it was a really impressive game. And just his positioning on the field, he knows where to find the football in a good position in order to transition well. He was fantastic. One of David Loader's best on the ground was definitely Alex Milan, and just a player he was impressed by. Offensively, just wins the ball out of the contest and knows how to burst out of a stoppage and find an open play. He was making great scoreboard impact as well, especially for someone who has a bit of a defensive mindset as a midfielder. He was just getting on the scoreboard, and that was really impressive, David, in the end, and just a great two-way running player. Two more I sort of want to touch on, and if there was someone on Instagram that reached out to us about Kai Jess, that his grandfather did play, I think. Can't remember where he played, but Kai Jess is the grandson of him, and they wanted to know a bit about him. Played very well, 22 touches, very high-end, high-effort type of player with great leg speed. Just has very good position around the footy and great pressure, and that is one to watch. So thank you to whoever sent that message to us. So that there you go. There's a bit of info on Kai Jess. And one more, Joel Frazier, probably the one that stood out very early on in the game. He was just terrific. And I think his composure to lace kicks along the boundary line was, really good as a wingman. That probably shouldn't have made a lot of those kicks where the pressure was just very tight. Bendigo sort of wanted to kill the ball a bit, under that pressure in the first quarter especially, and he just laced these kicks out and opened the space up into the middle. Very good composure. So Joel Frazier was the last one for me.
And then from a Bendigo perspective, I know, having watched them, and I watched a little bit of this game as well, and having watched them in a practice match, Toby Travaglia is one who always impresses just with his bravery off half back and his excitement and what he sort of provides on offense. And he had a really good game, Nathan. I sort of thought took some intercept marks, so we know he has the ability to do it aerially. I don't think he would have played any talent league last year. I may be wrong, though. He's a bottom age year this year, and he played for Vic Country in the under-16s champs last year. But there were some other performers who I know stood out from your perspective. So do you want to give an insight into them? You obviously caught, like you say, a bit more of the game than I did.
Bailey Kane was one that was really impressive. Just his ability to take the game on out of the defensive lines was really impressive. And Danny O'Brien, coach of the Bendigo Pioneers, loves his heart and soul, personality in that team. Just one that the players look up to as that player that's going to get the job done 9 times out of 10. So he was one that was very impressive. Tom Evans had a really good impact around the footy, and 9 contested possessions, 4 rebound 50s. He was one that was prevalent on the day. Oscar Smart, a lot of good tackling pressure. Probably didn't show as much as this game, but he's got a really good skill set that I think will be prevalent come the next couple of weeks. And 2 players that Danny was very strong on watching out for, especially in the next couple of weeks. Paula Kuma, really good speed and competitive. Didn't have a very good game on the weekend, but Danny's very set that he will come back and impress.
Yep.
Apologies. Bit of a dry throat, so recovering, but I'm getting there. So, Jonty, you read out the last one for me.
No, that's all right. Yeah, no, and I suppose you were also speaking when we've spoken about it about Dan Ureta is another one who will go well when he does get some chances and could push up to the next level if he does get the opportunity to. But I suppose to move on to the next game, which was probably alongside Sandy Easton as match of the round, given they've exposed their bottom ages so much in Geelong and Dandenong. Geelong winning that one by 30 points. But yeah, both teams had players that impressed. I mean, your Vic Country operators went really well for both teams, as you would expect. So you had, I suppose, from Geelong, you had Patrick Hughes in the midfield. He's a big-bodied midfielder. He's already a part of Vic Country, and he performed really well around the ball and was a big factor in why Geelong were able to break even or even win that sort of midfield battle. Then you had Michael Rudd, who made most of some opportunities up forward and looked really damaging. And then from a Dandenong perspective, they had Cooper Simpson out with the corky he sustained last week, expected to be right for this week's match at Highgate Reserve. they played the Brisbane Lions Academy. But that meant that Harry Demadia, their fellow co-skipper, was the sole skipper on the day, but more importantly, played the midfield forward role rather than the wing halfback that he was sort of more looking at. So he filled in Cooper's shoes and did really well, 15 touches and 3 goals, which is a really good effort for a player who probably wasn't expecting to play there up until about 48 to 72 hours before the game. So it was good to see him step up and start the season on the right foot. And then, yeah, you also had Sam Fangalis did well from the midfield. You had guys like Kobe Ship, who we've seen him in defence. He played a little bit on the wing. He showed his ability overhead. And also Josiah Nanup is one who has been a wild card that's been mentioned in different places, and people are keen to sort of see how he goes. Didn't get as much of the ball, but had some really good moments with his pressure and that sort of thing that set up some teammates that caught the eyes. So I suppose how well he went can't really be measured in statistics and certainly not in possessions. So they were the main ones from that game, which is a really, really interesting game. But yeah, I suppose moving on to Calder and Gold Coast. Calder were able to get up in that one. 13 goals kicked across the two teams. Calder got up by 20 points. Ryanair, the big name. I keep hearing Ryanair. I've heard it from a few people. So tell me, having watched a bit of that game and from what you've sort of heard, Nathan, is he one to keep an eye out for?
Well, he's part of the Essendon NGA Academy, so definitely one we've already heard about. But I guess a good story beyond that is that it was his first full game of footy in 3 years. So that was already impressive in itself. 25 touches on the day and really set the boys up behind the plate and moving forward. So he was definitely one that stood out. And look, to be honest, Jonty, I'm going to let you cover my part for this because my voice is slowly giving out on me.
Yeah, well, I suppose the other things, I suppose I heard a little bit about Amin Naeem and Isaac Kako up forward. Low possession player Isaac Kako kicked a couple of goals, but only probably had the 8 possessions. But whenever he gets around the ball, he's an absolute gun from what you hear. And I know I predicted him to kick the most goals this season, and to start off the year with 2 was really impressive. Harry O'Farrell is one who played a really important role. He's a bottom major on debut, and he played on Jed Walter, who is probably in that first round category at this stage of the year and did really well. So he's one with a lot of upside. And then they've got a lot of other bottom majors as well. I mean, I mentioned Kako before. They've got Jaden Wynn, who's a lightly framed player, gets a lot of the footy and sort of knows how to get it, which isn't always easy for the position that he plays. Patrick Said is another one who's got great vision. And I suppose if you're going to mention one more, you'd be remiss not to mention the name of Mudi Taha, whose drive out of contest and that sort of thing was really impressive for a player who's part of the Bashahuli Academy. And he's already got wraps on him. He's part of the Vic Metro hub as well. So looking forward to seeing if he can really sustain that form throughout the season, because from what I've seen of him, he's really impressive, and it's good to see that he's played round 1 as well as what he sort of has shown in practice matches.
Well, that does wrap it up as my voice slowly dies. But because of that, we're going to do our round 1 tips as a separate clip. So head over to Instagram to look at that, just because I've run out of water. So I've been drinking water the whole time. But no, thank you for joining me, Jonty. It was a good first and second round. The review will be back next week doing the exact same thing. So stay tuned for that. But thank you everyone for watching. Keep track on our socials for more content, and we'll see you in the next episode.